Let's talk about something that seems really basic, heaven. But maybe there's more to it than meets the eye. And not only heaven, but let's talk about the high places. So let's dig into that a little bit. If you look into all around the globe in the ancient world, nearly everybody had the same model for their cosmology, for their view of how the everything worked, which was there's the earth, and there's the sky with the stars and everything, and then there's this other place that's above and beyond the sky, that's somehow in a different category. And the word for that is heaven, right? And so you look, here's Mesopotamia, and they've got that model. They also have underworld. And the Hittites, same thing. You go out to China, they have the mandate of heaven. Above the sky is this heaven where morality and moral authority to rule comes from. The mandate of heaven. And then you go to India with Hinduism, and they've got multiple levels of this heaven layer above us. And then you switch from the old world to the new world. And you got the Aztecs. They've got 13 levels of this heaven above us, right? And same thing for the Mayans and the guys in Peru, the Incas. Now you move all the way out to the Polynesian Islands. You'd think that's a completely different category. But nope, they've got the same thing where above the sky, beyond us, is this heavenly realm. So once again, the model is the earth, where we are, the sky, with the stars and everything, and then there's some other thing, or other dimension or something that's beyond and above the sky even, and that's heaven. And the interesting thing about heaven is that's where God or the gods live. Okay? And so we're down here on the earth, and they're up there in this beyond place, heaven. And as a matter of fact, they can influence us down here, but we never, mortals never go to heaven. Okay? And this is in sharp contrast to the average thing you ask any American, about heaven, and they'll say, well, yeah, that's the place you go when you die. But before Christ, there's no idea whatsoever, except for maybe the earthly rulers who get divinized, they become gods, of mere mortals ever getting to go up to heaven. I mean, all these cultures, nearly all of them, have the afterlife. There's the Egyptian afterlife, where you bring all the people who might want to kill you because you're not a good king, you kill them and bring them with you to the afterlife. So they're heavily motivated to keep you alive as long as possible, right? And then there's here's Odysseus in the underworld, where there is an afterlife, but it's pretty dismal with these gloomy, ghostly figures that are kind of not doing much. And in the Hindu world, there's incarnation, reincarnation, right? But the point is, there's no idea that when you die in the afterlife, you go to heaven. There's different things that can happen, and there's different forms of an afterlife, but you don't get to go to heaven. And yet there's that's what we all think. You ask anybody on the street, and they think that, yeah, when you die, you go to heaven. So where does this idea of when you die, you go to heaven come from? Well, it comes from Christianity, and by the way, you may have trouble recognizing this icon, but this is the ascension icon. Where did Christ go? I mean, it's right there in the creed here. I have this memorized, but when I'm live and in color, I may not be able to do it. It says, he rose again, according to the Scriptures, ascended into heaven, and sits at the right hand of the Father. So that's where Christ is. And then you read the Apostle Paul, right? And he's writing to the Philippians. He's in jail in Rome. He doesn't know whether he's going to be killed or not. He says, "For me to live is Christ and to die is gain. The afterlife is better." And just skipping along here, "But I'm hard pressed to know what to do. I have the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better." So Paul has this expectation that when he dies, he's going to go to be with Christ. And where's Christ? In heaven. Kind of up these stairs, right? Okay? And, but Paul is Paul, and we're just like regular Christians, right? But the interesting thing is, in 1 Thessalonians, which is the very first Christian document that we have available to us, written before any other Christian document, in Paul's, before the Gospels, it's written right after Paul goes through Thessalonica, and he has to run for his life, and he's wondering, hey, are you guys still Christians? What can I... So that's the background on 1 Thessalonians. And he writes, this is like the basic teaching on what happens when you die from Paul. He says, "For God has not destined us for wrath, but obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we're awake or asleep, whether we're alive or dead, we will live together with him." So again, where's Christ? And where is an ordinary Christian going to go when he dies? He's going to be with Christ. So that's where it comes from. There's a couple of little hints in the Old Testament I'm not going to mention. But the basic idea of where this idea came from, that when you die, what happens, or where are you going, comes from Paul. And it says, whether we're awake or asleep, we will live together with him. So that's a little introduction to heaven. And we didn't talk about the other really major thing about what happens after you die, which is universally agreed by Christ himself, by the Apostle Paul, and the church in the creed, which is, shall I read it? "He shall come again with glory." Oh, look, I do have it memorized. "To judge the living and the dead." We're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. So that's like the fundamental, unarguable truth about what happens after you die. But what happens between now and then, him coming back? Paul says we're going to live together with him. So we may have an interesting discussion about this afterwards. So that's the quick introduction to heaven. But what about the high places? Okay? This phrase, the high places, appears 48 times, and they're all in the Old Testament. Do you remember hearing about it? And what kind of things happen on the high places? Well, here's the first place where it appears. This is in Numbers, when Balak, what is he? He's like king of Moab? I think that's right. He's in trouble because the Israelites... They have come out of Egypt and they're headed for his territory. And he's getting ready to have a war with them. So he brought this prophet guy, Balaam, to put a curse. Hey, you need to get in touch with the gods, put a curse on these guys so we can pep up the troops and have them jazzed that they're going to win this war. So what happened? Balak took Balaam and brought him to the high places of Baal, the idol, the false god. And there's the really interesting story, right? And what's the real highlight of the interesting story about Balaam? The donkey tells him, "Stop what you're doing, you idiot." Anyway, so here's another place where the phrase appears. Okay, we're talking about Solomon here, David's son, the wisest man who ever lived, right? And he is, following the Lord like his father David, except for one little thing. He's doing sacrifices and burnt incense on the high places. Now, why do you want to have these spiritual encounters with God or the gods on the high places? You want to get as close as you can, right? Hey, I'm trying. Hey, you up there, I'm talking to you, right? So that's the high places, and it goes throughout, the whole period, at least up to the Babylonian exile, where here's this guy Asa, king of Judah, and it says his heart was wholly devoted to the Lord all his days. But the people are still doing this high places thing. Okay? So that's our little introduction to the high places. But how about how the high places fit into major biblical events or major events? You can probably think of several right now. I'm going to run through a few, and you tell me whether I missed any important ones. Well, there's one with Abraham, right? That happens associated with a high place. It's when God does this incredible thing and asks him to sacrifice his son. And it seems like this incredible, outrageous demand, horrible demand. If he's a loving God, how could he do that? Well, he didn't actually have him get sacrificed. It's a foreshadowing of the sacrifice that God made of his only son. Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, one of the high places. So there's this this is like the most incredible thing that happens in the life of Abraham. And where does it happen? It happens on a high place. And then I think we talked about this one tonight in Vespers, right? Here's Moses at the burning bush. Moses is pretty young in St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai. And where does the burning bush appear? Well, Moses is out there pasturing the flock. He led the flock to Horeb, the mountain of God, the high place. That's where he has this encounter with God. And then the giving of the Ten Commandments, where God actually speaks out loud to all the people. Again, that's happening. God speaks from the top of the mountain. And here's Jerusalem, contour map of Jerusalem, with Mount Zion and Mount Moriah. All the spiritual things that are associated with Jerusalem it's a high place. So this is interesting. And then, of course, one of my favorite ones, the one that my kids loved me to tell this story when I was tucking them into bed. Elijah and the prophets of Baal. It happens on Mount Carmel. Elijah alone is by himself. There's 450 prophets of Baal, and it's an away game. It's on Mount Carmel, right? So there you go. Again, major spiritual events, encounters with God himself are happening in the high places. And then in the New Testament, there's the Sermon on the Mount. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain. It's another one of these high place things. And this is really one of the things I want to cover next week. So, there you go. And then last of all, that's a picture of Mount Tabor, where the transfiguration takes place, where they get to see, in some way, the true glory of Christ. Again, it's on a high place. Getting as close to God as you possibly can. As close to heaven as you can. It happens on a high place. So we've got this model, right, that seems to be something that's universal to nearly all humanity. That there's the earth, there's the sky, which sometimes we call the heavens, right? And then there's this other place that's above and beyond the sky. It's heaven. And the key thing is, throughout all these cultures, there's no way for mortals to get up to heaven where God dwells. Right? Here's a couple of passages in the Old Testament. Ecclesiastes. When was the last time you heard somebody quote Ecclesiastes? God is in heaven and you are on the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. And Psalm 115, our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he pleases. So there's this incredible gulf between humanity and the ultimate reality where God dwells, heaven, right? And that comes from the fact that we're created. And the fact is, the only way we know anything about God is Him revealing Himself to us. He says in Isaiah, as the heavens are higher than the earth. Well, that's pretty high, right? If it's above and beyond everything, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. How can we possibly have any understanding of God? And we're created, and He's just like in a completely different category. So if you go to the Cappadocian Fathers, and you all have those memorized, right? But I got my little crib sheet down here in the corner. That's Gregory, that's Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus. They really thought about this carefully, and they concluded everything else that exists was created, but the Creator transcends this existence. He's uncreated. He's in a completely different category from us. And as a result, the essence of God is completely unknowable. It's completely unknowable. By the way, we covered Gregory Palamas a little bit, right? And he took the Cappadocian Fathers and really polished that up and refined that idea about the essence of God being completely unknowable. It's impossible for us mortals to understand God completely. And even for us to know anything, and we'll have some discussion about this, anything significant about God, it's got to be a matter of Him revealing it to us. And we have the ultimate revelation of God, don't we? And that's the Lord Jesus Christ, right? He's the ultimate way that we know what God is like. John, who was there the whole time, who was someone who at the Last Supper was in the bosom of Jesus, he writes, no one has seen God at any time. It's impossible to understand God. But the only begotten God, Jesus Christ, His Son, who's in the bosom of the Father, He has explained Him. He's the ultimate revelation. We'll talk about this some more in the discussion. And here we are in John, the Epistle of John. And what does he say? This revelation that we have of what God is like. He says, what was from the beginning? He's talking about God. What we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands. Because of Jesus Christ, we've got that kind of close, personal relationship that's possible with God. Philip says in John 14, Lord, show us the Father, and it's enough for us. If only we could actually know what God's like. And Jesus said, Philip, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes, God, who said, light shall shine out of darkness, is the one who has shone in our hearts, given us understanding in our heart, to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God, give us an understanding of what the greatest things are about God. And where do we get that revelation? In the face of Christ. So, wrapping it up, under 20 minutes, Wade. Heaven is above and beyond the sky. It's where God dwells, and humans cannot go there. It's completely impossible. But Christ has made a way for us. He's not only revealed who God is, but He's made it so that after we die, as Paul was saying, we will live together with Him. Whether we're awake or asleep, we can have that relationship. And as usual, Revelation, the book of Revelations, finds a word picture to really express what's going on here, right? And John writes in chapter 4, he says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard, which was the risen Christ, like the sound of a trumpet, speaking to me loud and clear, loud and clear." And what does the voice say? From the door in heaven, the open door of heaven, he says, "Come up here." It's a completely new thing, unheard of anywhere in the world up until then. Now the door of heaven is open, and God is calling us, "Come up here." Isn't that great? Isn't the book of Revelations wonderful? Okay, well, we're going to have some good discussion about some of the things we've talked about Revelation, about what the Orthodox understanding is of what happens when you die, other things. But as I was saying, I was originally putting this together. This was just the intro for next week, which I think is going to be even better. Next week, we're going to compare two of the most important high place experiences where God reveals himself. Am I doing the... but wait, there's more. She's egging me on. The Sermon on the Mount and the voice of God with the giving of the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai.